Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the Safetipin new She Rises framework, on responsive, inclusive, safe, and equitable cities. We are really excited to have this webinar to share our work, as well as to have some very good friends, but really excellent panelists who will be joining us to give us their comments as well. Right up front, I would just like to apologize that our third discussant, Jagan Shah, will not be able to join us. There was a personal emergency today and he called in to give his apologies. So I'd just like to share that. So I'm going to just briefly introduce the speakers and the discussants, and then we will start the event for today. So this document, the She Rises framework, which is available on our website, www.safetipin.com, we'll show it to you on in the chat, was prepared by several of us working in the team. And currently here there is Riti Mandal and Ankita Kapoor from our team, as well as Surabhi Mehrotra, who has been working with us as a consultant, along with the rest of our team, to prepare this document over the past few months. So Riti is an urban designer who also teaches at the School of Planning and Architecture and is a member of Safetipin. And Ankita is an urban planner from CEPT University and works with our team. And Surabhi Tandon Mehrotra is a sociologist with a PhD from Delhi School of Economics. And I am Kalpana Vishwanath. I forgot I should introduce myself. I am the co-founder and CEO of Safetipin. Safetipin, who is hosting this webinar, we are a social enterprise that works towards creating safe, inclusive, and responsive cities using data as a method of building evidence and advocacy for cities, and technology as an enabler to amplify the voices of people in communities, in our cities, towards building more equitable cities. Safetipin is now 9 years old. So actually this framework is really an outcome, I would say, of a deep reflection of our work over the past 9 years. And our two panelists, discussants for today, we're really excited and we're very thankful that both of you have given your time and will be sharing your thoughts with us. Professor Darshini Mahadevia is a well-known scholar whose research focuses on equity concerns within urban policies relating to climate change adaptation and mitigation and human and general development. She's with the Ahmedabad University currently, and prior to this, she coordinated the Center for Urban Equity and was the Dean of Faculty of Planning at CEPT University, Ahmedabad. In particular, her research focuses on the processes of urban development from an equity perspective. Her work has focused on the impact of urban planning on the economically, socially, and politically weaker segments of the population, the urban poor, recent migrants, women specifically from the low-income segment. Welcome, Professor Mahadevia. And Namita Bhandare is an award-winning journalist with nearly 30 years of reporting experience for various publications, including magazines Sunday in India Today and the Daily Hindustan Times. In 2013, she was appointed the India's first gender editor for the Mint newspaper and remained in that position till 2016. She's at present an independent journalist who writes a fortnightly column on gender for the Hindustan Times and also writes from Mint, India Spend, and Foreign Policy. She's edited books, features, and a documentary on sexual violence and has, as I said, more than 30 years of reporting experience. So we really have people, two panelists, one from within the urban planning discipline, and Namita, who has worked consistently on the issues of violence, gender exclusion, and women's empowerment, the informal sector and workers in India. So I'm going to dive right into it. I think attendees will keep coming, and we're really delighted. Thank you, all of you, for joining us on this day. I know it's very near the end of the year, and you're probably all almost going on vacation or taking a break. So hopefully this will give you food for thought for the next week before we get back into January. So this document, as I said, really is a reflection of our 9 years of work. Over the past 9 years, when we began really with the methodology of the safety audit as a tool of mapping cities, public spaces in cities, from the perspective, from the lived realities of those whose realities were often not reflected in urban policy and processes. So the safety audit was a very simple tool. It is a paper and pencil tool which was being used since the late 1980s. What we did in Safetipin was to transform it into a technology tool in order to capture much larger data sets. As we've been doing that for the past many years, and we've worked in now more than 25 countries across the world, collecting data, working with cities, we have recognized that the process of gender transformation in our cities requires a very deep political commitment. And very often, municipal governments and others are willing to make small changes, do the changes on the low-hanging fruit. But really, after, I think, 15 years, and both Darshini and Namita and Surabhi will agree with me, where all of us have actually been grappling with these issues. While we see change, I think there's also a disappointment at how slow the change is and how incomplete the change is, in a sense. So really, the attempt of this document is to generate a conversation amongst all of us who have been engaged in this work over the past many years, to say, what do we need to do as we move forward? I'm going to begin this with two quotes, actually, from two men who are neither feminists, who have taught of feminist cities, but interestingly to me, whose work we need to engage with if we want to build feminist cities. The first is David Harvey, when he talks about the right to the city. And I think it's very important that we look at the right to the city from this perspective, which is, he says, it's far more than individual access to urban resources, but it is a right to change ourselves by changing the city. Now, this is very important because it is talking about an urban resident, how the process of having a voice in what the city can, what the city should be, to have a vision of what the city is. How do we make sure that that process, in fact, is something that allows us to transform ourselves, transform our lives into something? And if we look at women's lives in cities, that's a very big one, you know. And the second quote I want to begin with is really, again, someone who we would not call a feminist, Michel Foucault, but he talks about power. And he says, a whole history remains to be written of spaces, which would at the same time be the history of power. And I think this is very important because all of us who look at our city spaces recognize how power is actually embedded in so many of these spaces in so many ways. And the feminist geographer also talks about this when she says that our cities are patriarchy written in stone, brick, glass, and concrete. You know, so how does patriarchy get, as we know, all of us who've been working in this area, patriarchy is probably one of the most resilient institutions that we've had to grapple with, and it's able to adapt itself to every change that comes about. So really, how do we, I think the point I'm trying to say is that it's a very deep, a complex, a wicked problem that we're having to deal with, which requires us to look at it from very different lenses, to have a lot more people around the table when we are discussing the problem. And I'm saying this because when urban policies are being planned and designed, what we need is more women and more diverse sets of people at the table. But when the problems are being discussed of what is a feminist city or what is an inclusive city, then it's only women and it's only many people like us who are there. But actually we need a diversity at the table there as well, so that the disciplines begin to transform themselves, And I think we are talking about transformation here, gender transformation in the words of Caroline Moser, which is not just change, but transformation whereby we're actually seeing that it's not, she argues that gender empowerment is different from gender transformation. Gender empowerment can remove immediate inequalities, but it does not necessarily destabilize wider structural inequalities. So today, really, we are trying through this document to get the conversation to look at structural inequalities and how power is embedded in all our institutions. So, Ankita, maybe you can start this thing, presentation. The way we're going to do this is I will just do a brief introduction to the document, and I will hand over to my colleagues, Rithi and Ankita, to do the meat of the whole thing, the presentation, and then we'll have Darshini and Amita give their feedback, their comments, and their critical reflections on it. And then we will open it up to the audience to get more questions, to get your feedback, to get responses on how you think this would be useful for you as well. So when we look at cities from the perspective of women and girls, and I will, speaking today in 2022, I do recognize that gender is much more than binary of women and men. And we do believe that there is a lot of work that needs to be done around understanding how different people along the gender binary need to be part of the discussion, need to be part at the table, and their experiences need to inform the way that we plan our cities. But the work that we have done over the past 9 years has focused largely on women and girls. And there is a reason for that, and I will explain that as we go along. There are two broad kind of discursive narratives that actually determine the way that women and girls experience cities. One is the experience of fear. And the experience of fear and violence is very determining of how women themselves feel that they have the right to the city, and the right to the city as in the way I've described it, that do they have any say in what kind of a city that they want? And on the other side is the experience, the issue of the work of care. Next slide, please. While fear, we know, is what is when we talk about sexual violence as a way that determines whether we feel we can go out this time, that time, how it prevents women from studying, accessing opportunities. The other big issue that we are dealing with, and which we need to recognize as the bulwark of our cities, is both the economy and the ethics of care. Now, I just put some numbers for you to see. There are many studies, which many of you may be aware, but we do know that the unpaid care work, amount of unpaid care work that is being done in the world, data from 64 countries, which is representing nearly two-thirds of the world's working age population, shows that 16.4 billion hours per day are spent on unpaid care work. Across the world, women spend much more time. It varies across different parts of the world. In India, you can see it's 312 minutes per day compared to 29 for men. In Asia, it's about 4 times more. But we also know that the work of care is central to the way that our cities are run, the way that our companies are run, the way that anything is run. And I think one of the things we're trying to do in this document is to center stage that. And I think COVID showed us, really unpacked for us, how central the work of care was to the way that our cities are are built upon. And I do want to just quote one one sentence from this document to say why when we bring in the perspective of care, we go beyond an inclusion perspective. We know today a lot of people talk of inclusive cities where women, children, elderly, disabled, others are put as those who have been excluded, which is correct. These are all populations who have been excluded when cities have been designed. But I want to add, the patriarchal system places the burden of care, which includes caring for children, the elderly, and people with disabilities, upon women. Thus, when we speak of an inclusion perspective on cities, we must acknowledge the care economy. Otherwise, inclusion will be stripped of its social and political implications. Whilst inclusion aims to bring a diverse set of voices to urban design, planning, management, governance, recognizing how the care economy supports and subsidizes the state, the market, and the family will in fact lead to more equitable urban policies and practices. So this is the reason that we have, center stage both the nature of fear and violence that determines women's right to the city, but the care economy, which actually underscores how women are able to access opportunities, how the burden of the work falls upon women, and how inclusion itself needs to be complicated in order to bring about what we would like to see as transformation and not just change or even just women's empowerment, but really to look at this thing. So therefore, the feminist city really, to me, and I will use the word feminist city because I think when we talk about feminist city, to me, it is center staging these two elements. And what we have found, especially in India, is one of the big, I think, issues that we are facing in India today is the falling workforce participation. I know there's been a lot of work around it, which is saying that it is not only determined by the lack of safety in cities, but if we look at the urban form as a combination of a number of elements that come together, we will recognize that because all these elements are not being addressed as a within a holistic perspective, that social cultural norms and other things are able to continue to put pressure, thereby reducing women's participation in the formal economy, and more of them being pushed into the informal, unorganized sector, where we know they have no negotiation, they have very little rights, and very little ability to really transform their lives. So I would really say, just to quote Leslie Curran, she says, the feminist city is an aspirational project, one without a master plan, in fact, that resists the lure of mastery. The feminist city is an ongoing experiment in living differently, living better, and living more justly in an urban world. Next slide. So this, I like the word just, I like the word justice, equitably. So we have put together from this background, from this sort of conceptual and theoretical and reflective space that we are occupying today, what we're calling the She Rises approach, which is to look at the elements of responsive, inclusive, safe, and equitable. So for ourselves also, we are moving beyond safety and inclusion, which has largely been the sort of the elements on which most of our work has been happening over the past 9 years. By responsive cities, what we mean is that infrastructure and services are designed and planned based on the needs of the diverse set of residents that occupy cities. So that's what we mean by responsive. Inclusive cities, I think there's a lot of work around inclusive cities. What we mean here is cities embracing people of diverse identities, right? So we know that till primarily the body of which a lot of our cities are based on is able able-bodied, it's a male, it may be heterosexual, but how do we complicate that? How do we diversify that to have women, people of other genders, young people, children, elderly, migrants, across caste, across religion, because we know even today, caste plays a role in the way that people have access to services, housing in the city. And we must not underplay these elements, even in our cities, not just in our rural areas. Fine. And safety, of course, is to be able to move without fear, to be able to address violence, sexual harassment, which we know is a constant companion for women in our cities, at least in India. But we know this is also valid across the world. And finally, equitable. Equitable because we want to go beyond equality. Equality acknowledges injustice, but it does not focus on the diverse life situations of people in its solutions. Thus, the equity approach actually respects the diversity and recognizes there's no one size fits all when we look for a solution for something. Next slide. And before I hand over to Ankita and Riti to do the presentation, I just want to briefly say this is our framework. We've identified 4 broad streams. And we're using the metaphor of a stream because we recognize that these are all 4, in some senses, connected to each other, and changes in one flow into a change in another, unlike pillars which stand separate almost. So we're not calling these pillars, but we're calling these streams. There's public space and infrastructure, services, mobility, and responses to gender-based violence. Under each of these, there are 4 elements. And I am going to hand over now to Riti and Ankita to take us through this in a little more detail. Thank you. Over to you, Riti.
Thanks, Kalpana. Hello, everyone. My internet is giving a little bit of a problem. I just realized my UPS is not working. But in case I'm like frozen, not audible, please send me an WhatsApp so I will get to know. Yeah. So let me also now dive into the streams Kalpana just introduced and guide you through them. I will be speaking on the first 2 streams, which are on public spaces and infrastructure and services and amenities. The first stream, public spaces and infrastructure. So I feel cities can be seen and understood in 2 parts mostly, privately owned and publicly owned spaces. We largely see and experience our cities from public spaces, streets, squares, parks, gardens, markets, etc. And our daily experiences of urban life are framed by these spaces. In theory, these spaces are free spaces. They should belong to all and they should be enjoyed by all. But as Kalpana has just touched upon it, that the city spaces are often planned and designed from a singular perspective of an able-bodied cis male, the one which is visible in the city doing 9-to-5 jobs. And it kind of reinforces, when they're designed from that perspective, it kind of reinforces traditional gender roles, which also manifests in spatial segregation. So gender nature of public spaces impact women's access to opportunities, their mobility, their well-being, and their right to the city. Women and girls seldom enjoy leisure in public spaces, participating freely in public life. They actually conform to the social expectations of traversing between sheltered spaces. A range of aspects impact women's perception of safety and their ability to use public spaces freely. In this framework, we have included some of the key elements which impact the perception of safety for women. These are street lights, pavements, eyes on the street, and public toilets. Street lights. I think this is something everybody is familiar with, that, how street lights has a key role in our perception of safety. We do avoid dark spaces, we do avoid dimly lit spaces, and studies have supported that women change their routes because, of, spaces being not well lit. And this fear of dark spaces obviously limits our access in the city and eventually limits our access to opportunities and resources. It also kind of underplays our confidence into accessing the city. So women also, the way the city is designed, the women also kind of don't go into underpasses or, dark spaces or dark routes after it is, which is dimly lit, and even which are deserted. Pavements is another area. We all know, and each one of us is a pedestrian. So pavements which are not easily walkable, which are obstructed and broken, and we constantly have to negotiate step up and step down on the pavements, that really, again, deters the way we kind of use our cities. And also, when we see that how women have traversed the city or how women use the city, a lot of times they are accompanied by children, they are accompanied by elderly people. So that also becomes very difficult for them to easily walk the city. Eyes on the street. So eyes on the street is a lot of us are familiar of. It's something Jane Jacobs in 1960s, she kind of coined the term for natural surveillance, which talks about that people, they feel safe when they're seen by others. And seen by others by what I mean that when you're in a public space, either you're seen by people around you or vendors around you, or balconies or windows or entrances, where the streets which are basically active and which are overlooked tend to be safer than the ones which are not. And this theory, has been put in practice in terms of using mixed use development. So when the whole idea about mixed use development is to generate activity, is to have natural surveillance on the street. So this is a very important kind of aspect to activate the streets and to make, and which builds on our perception of safety as well. Public toilets. Public toilets is another area. I think most of the women in most of the cities, especially in the developing world, are kind of have faced that. A lot of times women don't want to go out on longer routes because there are no public toilets, because they cannot go to stop anywhere, and etc., all of that. So and where there are public toilets, we are all aware of the long queues which we see outside the public toilets. And why is that? The city bylaw, or all of that, or the provisions for toilet are made equally for men and women. But a lot of time, but it is seen that even the spaces which are the same kind of equal spaces, but the number of public toilets, which are the number of cubicles actually, which are there for women, fall short, because women use them, women with children use them, elderly use them, women, and a lot of time even trans women are using women's public toilet. Also, because women are expected to carry on this role or responsibility of childcare, all the changing stations, everything is there on the public toilet. So the women public toilet, if you really look at, it's like doubly, triply loaded with more activity and more access. Also, biologically, women use public toilets more than men. So looking at these 4 aspects, we have also put down some recommendations, which are key recommendations for each of these aspects. So I'll just go through them. Provide well-lit, obstruction-free pavements for ease of walking and safety of pedestrians in public spaces, including transit stops. Plan dedicated spaces for vendors on pavements to enhance eyes on the street. Plan neighborhoods with mixed-use development for better natural surveillance. And we know that mixed-use development has a direct relationship about women's perception on streets. Provide adequate, functional, and safe public toilets for women with provisions for breastfeeding and menstrual waste disposal. Design public toilets keeping children in mind for their easy access. So obviously you have to look at the height children use public toilets. So the wash basin or even the water closet or the mirrors, etc., should be designed as per their heights. Men's toilets should also have facilities for children. So the baby care, the changing station should be also in either both the toilets or can be a separate cubicle where both the genders can use it. Design safe, equitable public spaces. So a lot of time public spaces are designed keeping everybody in mind. So the design is only one part of it. The implementation is another part of it. And the last and the longer part of it is actually the maintenance of these public spaces. A lot of time public spaces are designed and they are not maintained. So they kind of go down back to where they had started with. So they should be regularly maintained, keeping safety and access for all. Ankita, you can go down to move on to the next one. Stream 2. So moving on to the next stream, which is on services and amenities. So in this one, we are looking at and we understand that the quality of urban life has a direct relationship with the quality of public services. When they're adequate, affordable, and accessible for all, irrespective of one's socio-cultural economic status, class, or position in the city. Housing, education, healthcare are the most important services that everyone should have access to. But if we have to understand the care economy, which is actually the bulwark of our cities, we have to give equal importance to the work of care and provide services that support the care economy in the city. We know that a considerable population of our urban agglomeration live in under-resourced, overcrowded urban settlements, which has little or no basic urban services for water, sanitation, secure housing, education, healthcare, childcare. Since women shoulder the responsibility of care and household work, poor services have deeper ramifications on the lives of women and compound the impact of urbanization the poor already have. And if we apply this intersectional lens, we see that within the poor and the marginalized, the experiences of women, they vary due to age, class, caste, marital status, ability, etc. Women often face enormous social and structural challenges in accessing and pursuing education and economic opportunities in the city. Let me now explain the 4 aspects which we are looking at and how they impact women in the city. Housing. This is one of the most important services which provide a foothold in the city and enhances access to education, healthcare, and employment. Women do not have equal access to housing and property ownership due to social, structural, and spatial inequalities. This further gets worse for single women and women-headed households, and those living in informal settlements with insecure tenure, mainly because of the threat of eviction, leading to loss of livelihoods, support networks, increasing their vulnerability to sexual violence. Because of the lack of low-income housing, low-cost rental housing, and poor support services, the challenges poor women face in fulfilling their roles and responsibilities are compounded. Hence, adequate provision for housing to keep women hence adequate provisions for women to help women have the security of tenure in the city is imperative. The next one is on childcare. The lack of quality childcare facilities within neighborhoods are of grave concern for women and families. Women resort to part-time jobs, low-paying jobs, informal jobs closer to home to reduce their time poverty, or they drop out of workforce altogether. Inadequate childcare facilities impact women across the economic spectrum and is one of the main reasons of lower workforce participation. Public provisions of creche, daycares, childcare centers are crucial in supporting women in their daily lives and must be also ensured in both public and private organizations. Because care work is done within homes, it is invisibilized and expected to be shouldered by women largely. Policies supporting care work in terms of providing childcare facilities will make it visible and accessible by both men and women, challenging the socio-cultural norms around it. Education. Quality education could transform communities and reduce existing inequalities. Ensuring girls' access to education would result in delayed marriages, better health, reduced gender-based violence, and social and economic independence. Unsafe access to and from schools and inadequate sanitation facilities are some of the primary reasons why girls drop out of school. Safer access, better toilet, comfortable learning environments could enhance increased enrollment and completion of school and higher education. Additionally, schemes are also required to bring back dropout girls to school. Healthcare. Women often neglect their health, especially sexual and reproductive health, due to socio-cultural norms, poverty, burden of care. Privatization of healthcare has, in a way, led to unaffordable healthcare provisions in the city for poorer women. Additionally, an awareness and even understanding and an uneven understanding of accessing public healthcare, which caters to women's health, is an issue. Therefore, it is necessary for city authorities to provide affordable, easily accessible, and quality healthcare with focus on women and girls. Next slide, please. Yeah. So for each of these four aspects, we also have key recommendations linked to each one of them. So special housing schemes for women, particularly single women, women-headed households, and hostels for women should be incorporated into development plan. The development plan should also look at insecurity of tenure, especially for women who are in the informal settlements, and have and provision for that. That where and how you should in the informal what is a resettlement colony should be planned, and not at the periphery of the city, but where it should be planned so that they don't lose out on their networks as well as livelihoods. Provision for childcare facilities, creches, and daycares within neighborhoods. So a lot of times only infant care or creches are provided. But what about the children who are a little older and who come back from schools where their parents are away from work? And so provisions for those children also should be made. Affirmative scheme for education of girls and programs to bring back girls who drop out. Ensure safe mobility to and from educational institutions, and provisions for safe and clean toilets with menstrual products. Young girls basically are in a disadvantaged position for unsafe streets, and they can't access school or educational institutions, also because of not having clean and safe toilets. Provisions for quality and affordable healthcare facilities for the poor and marginalized. Special provision for sexual and reproductive health. A large proportion of healthcare workers are women, and their working conditions also needs to be improved. I hand over to Ankita to take you through the next two streams. Ankita, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ritu. Hi, everyone. I'm Ankita, and I'll be taking you to the next two streams. So the third stream is mobility and public transport. Mobility is essential for everyone as it allows us to navigate through public spaces and enables us to access several opportunities, be it education, employment, or just plain leisure. Research in both developed and developing countries has shown that the mobility patterns of women are much different from men. Women are much more dependent on walking, public transport, or some form of paratransit for their everyday commute. As per census data of 2011, almost 80% of women either walk or use some form of public transport to reach to their workplace. Research also highlights that the travel patterns and mobility patterns of women are much more complex and are often shaped by their caregiving responsibilities and family obligations. Women often engage in trip chaining. That is, they make multiple short trips or they combine their trips. For instance, if a woman is going to her office, it's quite likely that she may want to drop off her kid to school. On her way back from office, she will stop at a departmental store to collect vegetables and groceries for the house, or stop at a pharmacy to collect medical supplies for her children or for the family. Women often also make trips in non-peak and off-peak hours, which is different from men who usually make most of their trips in the peak hour or the rush hour as we say. To enhance women's mobility and to ensure that they have equal and safer access to the city, the framework looks at four key components. So the first one is the design and the efficiency of public transport systems. As Kalpana and Rishi have touched upon, in most of our cities, the public transport systems are usually planned and designed by male designers, and they consider an average citizen who's usually an able-bodied male heterosexual as their user group. The needs of other user groups, such as women, children, are often neglected. Also, the public transport systems, which are already available in the city, are not available throughout the city. This is a serious concern for women who are living on the periphery of the city, since they have to wait for long hours at public transport stops to use public transport to be able to access basic education or even employment. The next important component is the safety component. For a woman or even for anybody else to be using public transport or just to move around in public spaces in an everyday life, safety is a very important concern. So when we talk about safety in public transport or in mobility, there are different elements of the public transport journey. So, for example, if a woman has to reach from her origin to destination, she must feel safe in all parts of the journey, from her home to public transport stop, while she's waiting at the stop, she's inside the vehicle. The experience in all the legs of the journey will decide how she will use public transport or whether or not will she continue to use public transport. Lack of safety and fear of violence in any part of the public transport journey is also one of the reasons why girls are not able to continue their education or women refrain from taking better employment opportunities far away from home. When we talk about mobility and use of public transport, it's also important to look at safe first and last mile connectivity options. If we want people to use public transport, it's absolutely imperative to make sure that first and last mile connectivity options like walking, availability of paratransit modes is available. Safe walking environments, availability of safe, reliable, and affordable modes of paratransit like autos and e-rickshaws kind of ensure that women are able to travel independently and they can use public spaces around the clock. The fourth component is about women's participation in the transport sector. Globally, we've seen that only about 17% of women are engaged in the transport sector. There are several factors for these low percentage. One of the main reasons is the existing socio-cultural norms that identify transport as primarily a masculine work and masculine domain, which kind of prevents women from joining the sector. Then there are other limitations. For example, limitations in height, minimum years of experience, prior driving license to drive HMV vehicles. All these things are also barriers for women to enter the work. In addition to all this, lack of supportive infrastructure such as daycare facilities for children of women in the transport terminals or functional public toilets for women in the transport terminal also makes it difficult to retain women in the transport sector. Now, our framework kind of looks at all these issues and suggests a few key recommendations. First and foremost is the need to collect gender disaggregated data to understand women's mobility patterns. It is very important that we spend resources and time to understand how women move, what are their challenges, when do they travel, how do they travel, what makes them feel safe or unsafe, and what works and what does not work for them to be able to provide and design for them. Next is to provide adequate availability and citywide coverage of public transport networks. This will help women, especially those who are living on the city peripheries, to also use public transport on a regular basis and access several opportunities. Then third is about provision of infrastructure, providing good lighting, safe and comfortable walking environments around public transport stops, along with providing natural surveillance elements like such as vendors and shops around the transport hubs will make women feel more comfortable. And then lastly, I think when we want more women to use public transport, so definitely we need to make efforts to ensure that we engage more women in the transport sectors as operators and providers. So there's a need for affirmative hiring policies and support infrastructures for women in the transport sector. And last but certainly not the least, there is a need for gender sensitization training of all transport staff, be it drivers, conductors, bus depot managers, or even senior officials, to ensure that they are able to support and assist women in the best possible manner. The fourth and last stream is the response to gender-based violence. So women face a continuum of gender-based violence, both in public as well as private domains. To ensure that women are able to truly and fully enjoy their right to the city and use public spaces freely, it's important that the city offers a range of services to support survivors of gender-based violence, along with providing preventive measures to reduce instances of gender-based violence. Our framework looks at 4 key mechanisms that can be used to reduce gender-based violence and to support women survivors of violence. First is laws and policies. So there are several laws and policies that acknowledge sexual harassment as a form of gender-based violence and also provide support services for survivors of domestic violence. For example, the Criminal Law Amendment Justice Act under the Indian Penal Code explains what is sexual harassment, what is stalking, what all is covered in all these things. Then there are also detailed guidelines by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare to assist medical health professionals to better understand the needs and concerns of survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence. But the main issue with policies and laws is that a lot of time many people are not aware about these policies and programs. Also, if they're aware, then there is weak implementation and enforcement of these policies. The next mechanism is helplines. A lot of helplines have been set up by different departments and agencies such as police or state and women commissions to help women in distress. However, one major concern that a lot of women have raised is that the difficulty of remembering so many different helpline numbers and then using them in the moment of need. Another reason why women sometimes do not want to use helplines is that they are not sure how long will it take for them to get responses and whether or not the operator on the other side will be able to understand their problem and guide them properly. Cities need crisis centers and shelters as well to be able to provide timely support, timely response and support such as health and psychological support, legal assistance, and also to help women, for example, lodge a formal complaint in a police station. Many Indian cities already have provisions of shelters, even night shelters, to provide basic amenities and space for the urban homeless women. However, the main question here is that how safe are these shelter homes and spaces? How easily accessible are they? Where are they located? And are they designed considering the needs of the survivors of gender-based violence? Apart from all these 3 mechanisms, the role of gender mainstreaming and gender sensitization is imperative. Provision of sexual harassment committees and regular gender sensitization training in organizations and departments helps to create a safe and enabling environment for women workers. Such provisions also kind of show the commitment of the organization or the department to end gender-based violence and encourage women to come out and speak about instances of and report instances of sexual harassment without fear, hesitation, or shame. In the context of these 4 mechanisms, our framework looks at a few key recommendations. First and foremost is to ensure effective implementation and monitoring of all laws and policies that address GBV. Second is to launch a single helpline number, like for example, a child helpline number is there, 129. So we need a single helpline number so that women can use that number, and then once they use that number, they can be directed to different they can be directed to different departments, and then they can get assistance accordingly. Third is provision of adequate number of functional crisis centers and shelter homes which are easily accessible, located in safe areas, and designed considering the needs of survival. Fourth, we need to design and implement strategies and campaigns to challenge the existing norms, to challenge the existing patriarchy, to be able to really change attitude and behavior of the community so that eventually girls and women have safe access to public spaces and to the city. And last but not the least, there's a need to invest time as well as resources to design capacity development programs and standard operating procedures for key sectors such as policy, health, transport departments to be able to support women and survivors, other survivors of gender-based violence in the best possible manner. I'll stop here for now and give the floor back to you, Kalpana, to take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Riti and Ankita. Before I open up to Darshini and Namita, I just want to ask Surabhi if there was anything she wanted to add on this right now, or yeah, you're on mute.
Sorry, nothing right now.
Okay, fine, thanks. So I'm going to call on Professor Darshini Mahadevia first to give her comments, and then after that to Namita, and then we have some responses, and then we will open it up. Please keep your questions ready, everybody. Thank you. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Kalpana, and thank you, Kalpana. We've been in sort of touch and dialogue on the issue of women's safety in cities and the Safetipin. And I think your earlier work and the idea of safe cities for women have led to some of us here doing a research on this issue and taking up public spaces. So my comments are actually, before I go into my comments, I think I'm really appreciative of the effort that has been put in place. I really like the campaign of She Rises, because women are, we're just saying that women would like to take over the cities rather than be considered as beneficiaries of programs that are being put in place. And I think we have the same sort of understanding that we're not looking at women as beneficiaries of anything that's going on or we propose to be in the cities. I also like the term caring cities because I think given the world around us, something that's really important is to care for each other. The idea of care in a much broader sense, humanizing our existence in a way. But it also then, this paradigm also makes us shift in terms of policy to what the policy on cities, if we read India's documents or many other international documents. I mean, international documents are sort of mixed kind of trends and they don't really are not very clear, such as the New Urban Agenda and so on. But if you look at India's documents, we start with a statement that cities are engines of economic growth. And the idea that caring cities that you put forth, we're starting with, is changing the paradigm about looking at cities and their role. The cities are habitats where people are located. That's where women's aspirations are sort of met and so on. So it's in a way, caring cities a very aspirational kind of goal for city planning, governance, and other policy related issues. So I really like this idea and needs to be taken up as a campaign for relooking at our interventions from the national and local governments on the city issues. It reminds me a long time back, around 2000, I was doing a little research in Montreal, and there was this campaign which was called Farmville, Women in Cities. And it was really starts from the women's movement, but gets mainstream into the political party agenda. And then there was a department, or whatever one wants to call, within the city government. And I think we need to now think about not that, I mean, when one wants to look at women separately, but one needs to also to bring attention to the barriers and issues facing around while women want to claim the city. So my first question is, which we need more closer discussion and thought, is to whom is the document targeted towards? Because the way the agenda which have been, the action which has been put forward, it's really an action for the civil, so to say, broader society on patriarchy, versus it's an agenda for planners. And I read the question that Madhavi Ben has put in about we should have more women planners, but we should have planners which is more humanistic rather than only women planners into it. So to whom is it? Is it to governance issues? Is it to sort of financiers and bankers and so on? There is a book which I think Ranana Japwala and Bijal Bhatt wrote about, what was the title? When Women Build Cities. Basically, women, once again, they're also trying to claim that women are major stakeholders in the city and how they would, what they would want of the cities. And it comes from very much Seva's and Mahila Housing Trust experience of centering all the programs around women. So I think we need to be thinking about this. I would be able to contribute more on later on some of the specific aspects of how planning and what kind of planning could be. Second broad point that I want to raise is, various different agendas and ideas. It just strikes me because I just come out of a discussion on net zero carbon in India and climate change related discussions. And I do see there are so many co-benefits and links with some of the discussions that have been put here, the action points which have been put here. Well, would it be really useful to think of sort of linking with other agendas, because everybody is talking about the same, and I kind of emphasize and highlight that if we were to do increase public mobility of women, for example, in transport, it was discussed that obviously you need transition in terms of safety of women and accessibility, but the key question is that women's mobility is really very, very low today. They are forced walkers, they are not even bicyclists in the cities, and we need to increase their mobility. And can that mobility, because that is the argument that we are continuously making, that you can't say low carbon transport, which is meaning that you're going to reduce mobility. For us, it's increasing mobility. In that case, then our agenda ties up with the climate mitigation agenda of a low carbon transport increasing. And so I think that there are other parallel agendas going on, and we should be able to plug our gender caring agenda into the other agendas as well to sort of make a larger argument. The third thing, which is, and in this kind of plugging with the larger arguments, I think, Atna, all of you were also active in the campaign called Maybe Delhi campaign, which is one of its kind actually in India. But we need more such campaigns to look at how planning pans out in the city, because a lot of sort of action agendas which have been talked about, which is presented, deals and touches the issue of planning. I mean, talking about largely spatial planning on land being available and so on. I mean, I don't, nothing can be, there's nothing to say about the way we are planning, because we actually, the title is master plan. I mean, it's development plan is a better term, but the master plan, it clearly articulates it's a patriarchal practice of control of a few individuals, a few technocrats over how the cities have to be. And so it's not a master plan, it's a plan of the women, or whatever we want to call. I mean, a few cities about 10, 15 years back had done cities plan from the women's perspective, a special plan from women's perspective. I suppose that was what was also given as inputs into maybe Delhi campaign, but then finally, I think Delhi master plan probably is not really reflecting on what's being discussed at the moment, because Delhi master plan entirely is based on the idea of land value capture. And it's only a kind of, the goal is economizing, not economizing, raising money from land. And that's all is the agenda of Delhi master plan, and not just Delhi master plan, but all the development, including what is called a development plan in Ahmedabad and Mumbai, they are all basically land speculation plans rather than development plans. And that's where it's a big a wall that one is going to run into in terms of how we're going to go progress. But I think we'll have to somehow find a way to deal with this issues. And to tie to this issue of if these agendas need to be acted upon, there's going to be need for looking at financing of plans and financing of activities at the city level. The idea has petered off in India about 8-10 years back now, and maybe more now, I forget. There was this women's budgeting exercises, and there was women's component plan, and looking at national and state budgets from women's perspective. We can also do that. We have done that exercise for 2 cities on looking at municipal budgets from, there are lots of methodological issues here, but that also makes that when you start looking at methodologies, that is all itself a platform for campaign of how one looks at budgets. And so that financing needs to be brought in. And so this is really a huge agenda. And so the major point that I want to make is that, could we think of how we go forward from here? What are our sort of action points, or what are our next steps in terms of what we are going to do, with whom are we going to work with in terms of campaigning and so on. So there are governance agendas you've talked about. We've not yet talked about, I don't think financing institutions, they have their own agenda, kind of lens into looking at how city finances work and where, what should be financed and rate of return and so on. How does women, this agenda that's been presented, fit into the lens that financing institutions have and so on? So I think I'm totally in agreement with the document that is put in place, but I think one still wants to see some action in one's own lifetime. So that is what I'm looking forward to, as to how you take this forward going with city and city governments. Thanks.
Thank you, Darshini. I think that's absolutely correct. We are all, it is a bit of an aspirational document, and it does need to be translated into this thing, but we think it has the elements of it. I think your point about the master plan is a very important one. You know, I mean, long ago, Audre Lorde said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Maybe the ethics and economy of care, where we completely shifted away from the way, which you're right, all our development plans are really land value, land use plans, nothing else actually. And though we try through maybe Delhi and all that, we're actually speaking at cross purposes.
So it's not just a land use plan, it's making money out of land. It's a land value capture plan. So it's even much narrower way of looking at land use planning.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you so much. I'm not going to answer them your broader questions right now. I'm going to first ask Namita to share with us her perspective, and then we'll open it up. Thank you. You have to unmute yourself, Namita.
Yes.
No.
Very, very interesting that Professor Mahadevia brought up this issue of land value just days after news has broken about Dharavi being resettled. And, you know, this is Asia's largest slum. And it would be interesting to see if the what is so far a public-private partnership, as far as I can understand from the news reports, whether they will have the courage to reimagine this space to be all inclusive. Kalpana, I am a generalist, so I'm not really an urban planner. I don't bring in the expertise of all of you, including Professor Mahadevia. I'm going to comment just as a journalist, and it struck me just before this that we are actually having this webinar and you are releasing this document literally to the date of the 10th anniversary of that horrible, brutal gang rape of a young medical student in 2012. That crime took place in a moving bus. She had gone to see a movie in one of what was then South Delhi's new glittering mall, and she was just a girl trying to get home. She was with a friend, and that's when where the crime took place. And we do know in the interim, in this decade, how much has changed in terms of the legal landscape. Somebody referred to, I think it was Rithi referred to, or did you refer to the Criminal Amendment Act and POXO. POXO actually came in just before, but changing the age. So the legal landscape has not lacked for change. It's another issue whether the laws are being implemented. Whether the so-called Nirbhaya, I mean, it's not so-called, it is called Nirbhaya Fund, and I strongly object to the use of the word Nirbhaya for a living woman to confer on her and ask for martyrdom. So I always refer to her as the student and never to Nirbhaya. But unfortunately, the fund is referred to as a Nirbhaya fund. And we do know that it is so underutilized. The problem is that the money is there, but it is just the imagination or the will to want to use it isn't there. So while we talk about what all has changed in the decade, and let's not undermine what all has changed, what we don't talk about enough is what hasn't changed. Landscapes and city landscapes and public spaces, whether it is a bus, whether it is a mall, they remain hostile and unsafe spaces to half the population. And schemes to encourage greater participation by women function often like band-aids, just putting things together to prevent the scab from falling out. So piecemeal, everything is being done piecemeal. So in the aftermath of this crime, the buzzword was CCTV, as if CCTV was suddenly going to, be some magic wand that would miraculously transform our experience of the city and of navigating the space. In Delhi, for instance, we now have bus fares, which are free to all women. And I believe, Kalpana, you would know better that there is a study to look at the impact on this free bus fare. I think Rithi spoke about how only 20% women, according to the census, 22%, I think it is, use public transport. The rest walk. So what is the impact of this free bus ride on women? Buses are supposed to have a marshal. They're supposed to have a panic button to ensure safety. I've already mentioned CCTVs. The city is awash with CCTVs that capture footage of crime after they happen. Recently there was a acid attack on a schoolgirl on her way to school, and it's all captured on CCTV, but it is after the fact. It is after the fact that she is in hospital battling burns. It is after the fact that she will probably be scarred for life. So it is this thing. There's been a lot of mention earlier about getting more women to participate in the transport industry. And for many, many years, I was surprised to learn that there was just one woman DGC bus driver. All journalists went to her every time, Women's Day and all these occasions that we mark so faithfully. And the reason was ridiculous. It was because, the height requirement was 5'6". Even though the low floor buses, the redesigned buses did not require that height requirement. And so it was a very simple thing of just waking up and understanding that the bus design had changed. You could get women of lesser stature, and now you have 11 women who are being trained. And of course, you have other problems. These 11 women, for instance, in the DTC terminal, do they have access to toilets? Is DTC going to build special toilets separate toilets for 11 women out of all their, I don't know how many hundreds of drivers they employ? In Chennai, we've seen some encouraging results. A gender lab has just been launched with great fanfare. I believe it's an initiative, partnership between World Bank and, of course, the highly woefully underutilized Nirbhaya Fund. It's examining infrastructure, looking at infrastructure, keeping women in mind. So I honestly don't know. These are all works in progress. And I honestly don't know if anybody has an answer as to how they're working. However, it is encouraging that we're at least asking. We're looking at the question. So I'm not entirely pessimistic. So I hope, and like Professor Mahadevia, I want to see change in my life. And I'm hopeful that some of these changes, including your report, will bear fruit. Just a few other points. We've already talked about what happens, when we talk about exclusion, and when we talk about women's space, we look at a lot of, political participation, for instance, or we will look at, how many judges in the higher judiciary are women. We don't look, our minds aren't yet trained to look at our participation in public spaces. It's not always panchayat, parliament, judiciary. Public space, a park is also crucial. Yet, and parliament is a public space. I would argue. This is where democracy happens, and democracy happens equally in a park as it happens in parliament. It equally happens in the Supreme Court as it happens on a pavement. These are just different locales for democracy that is happening. And I'm grateful to you, Kalpana, for pointing out that it's not just women, but if you put together this entire demographic of women, trans people, and other gender minorities, differently abled, children, adolescents, and the elderly, you are actually looking at a demographic which is almost 2/3 of the population. So we have been designing cities for 1/3, that is able-bodied men, and the mind boggles. It's 75 years after independence, after a constitution that guarantees us equality. We actually have to say this. We actually have to say, hey, who is this place designed for? I'm excluded. I don't have space over here. We've already spoken, so I won't go over that, the need for adequate lighting, clean toilets, changing rooms, nursing stations. I love the suggestion that changing rooms in both toilets. Yes, yes, yes. Please, childcare, we don't come with some special God-born talent, to change diapers. Anyone can do it. And the issue is not safety. The issue is access. And I think many of us over here have already expressed this. It's not just about protecting women. It's not just about benevolence. It's also about giving us our rights. The idea, for instance, of women's leisure time is so radical that there is an entire book, Why Loiter? Shilpa Phadke's excellent book, Why Loiter, which is a call to action. Why loiter? Because, the cities don't look at women. I am especially grateful for you to bring up women's workforce participation, which has been a deep, deep concern. And I think that circle of concern has been widening. More and more people are talking about it, looking at the factors, care work, of course, mobility, public transportation, both in terms of cost and in terms of safety, has a big, big factor. But I think when we're talking about public spaces, I don't mean to rain on this parade. I want to remember, and I think it's important for us to remind ourselves that very often the most unsafe place for women is not in public, but in their homes, in their own homes. We have seen this with the domestic violence numbers, particularly during the lockdown, when women were literally locked at home with their abusers. We have seen this in child sexual abuse cases. So emphatically, the home is not the safest place. In the public imagination and in this kind of modern myth making in which media has also been culpable, public spaces are so dangerous. Going by, look at what happened in December 2012. She only took a bus at 9 o'clock at night and she didn't make it home. But that is true. I'm not saying that it didn't happen, but we do not know of the stories that take place behind closed doors. Once in a while, there'll be something as sensational as an Aftab Poonawala, and everybody will sit up and take note. But let's remember. And so my suggestion when I was listening to Ritti and Ankita and you is that, when you're talking about creating an inclusive space for women in public, I wonder if you could have the space to include a safe space for women and children. It could be in the form of, I'm speaking from the top of my head, the form of a community library, where ostensibly the reason could be, we're going for hobby class, or we're going for self-defense class, or we're going to learn whatever, X, Y, Z. But it becomes a space where women can spend some time outside the house, because I'm not sure everybody wants, you want to be there. There is a sisterhood. You want to be with like-minded people. Yes, you must have access to buses. Yes, you must have access to parks. But yes, maybe you also need this little space. Somebody mentioned, for instance, creches take care of very young children. But if you had these community centers, this is where older kids could go to do their homework. And it becomes this. So I think you're looking at your watch. I'm getting a bit nervous. I think I'll wrap up. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been wonderful, wonderful learning for me.
Thank you so much to both of you. And, I think both of you have brought up really important points. The Nirbhaya Fund is a deeply problematic one. And I think what you're talking about, the CCTV cameras and the security perspective to safety is what this framework is trying to challenge. We're not looking for protection. You're absolutely right. We're not looking for something out there like a CCTV, which will bring safety. And I think it's very problematic that the Nirbhaya Fund is primarily being used for CCTV cameras, which is something the police need, not that women need for our safety. So, I think the imagination of what women need, in the aftermath of the Jyoti Singh case in 2012, there was a proliferation of emergency apps because the imagination was that now women need a button to press when they are feeling unsafe. Not how do we enable them to use the city much wider. And I like your idea of, a space and to address domestic violence and other forms of violence. And we have recognized that the continuum of violence is from the home to the public, and we need to see it. That's why in our responses, we're saying that it has to be a much wider response. But I think the idea of having some kind of community spaces where women can also participate in is an interesting one. We do have about 10 minutes. I'm going to ask, is there any questions? There were a few questions on the question answer. Dhwani has asked about public buses, which are very crowded. Women face subtle forms of violence, and it's difficult to file a case, and there's victim shaming. And I think, and Namita, this is exactly what you were talking about as well. When we look at these spaces, how do we actually address it? It's true. And I think the public bus is the most difficult space to lodge a case because you don't even know who it is. And you are yourself in a moving bus. You are also yourself going somewhere. You don't necessarily want to stop and file a complaint. So I think we have to look at other mechanisms of doing this. In Quito, Ecuador, there was a system where if you had a problem, you could actually press a button, which was not some sort of vague panic button, but it actually went from the bus driver, the next stop, there was a police van or bike which was there. So there was actually something that could be done about it. Unfortunately, the panic buttons that are there in our taxis and buses, I don't think they work. I don't know if anybody's on the other side, so we are setting up systems which we don't know if they work, and which is why this framework is saying it is a holistic perspective. We need to do much, much more. I'm really going to ask for questions. I know you've put some down. Anyone want to say something? Please, raise your hand or just speak. We have a few minutes. And Sunita, you had put something in the question answer. Would you like to say something? Anybody else who's here? Madhavi Ben is also here. I see many comrades who are here with us in this journey.
On the panic button, while other people are raising their questions, Taiwan has this very interesting thing in the public bus. If you press the panic button, the whole bus goes to a police station first. I mean, even if it's outside the route, and then kind of continues its journey. So that is how they have the gender cell has ensured that this is the kind of response the city should have, along with gender neutral toilets, along with, this baby changing stations, what we are talking about in the public restrooms.
Thanks, Rithi. I think Sunita's put on her camera.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think this has been an evolving framework, and I think it's come together very comprehensively, and I'm almost seeing a systems-based approach to how she rises in the context of, shaping cities, policies, and programs. And I think if you take each of your streams, it would be good to do a very rapid gender gap analysis on each of those subcategories, look at how much funds, when we look at the large pool of budgets, and I'm speaking on behalf of the work we do at the Feminist Policy Collective, where we really look at transformative financing and look at where the gender gaps in financial flows are and what might be investments. Because what happens is we spend a lot of time talking about the qualitative dimensions of work, which is extremely important, but I think we have to match it with what are the resources. And you do have a stream that is talking about resources. So that's why I was just suggesting maybe you'd like to look at a fifth stream that really cuts across, which is your transformative financing. And what might it cost a city to invest into each of these dimensions? And what does it take? What is the kind of coalition and alliance building that is needed at a more comprehensive level to be able to realize both the services, the gender sensitive infrastructure development, and also ensure that safety and rights of diverse women are respected. Thank you.
Thanks. Surabhi, did you want to say something? You put your camera on. You're muted.
I'm good, thanks.
Okay. No, absolutely, Sunita. And actually, I think all three of you brought up this point is what next? What are we going to do with this document? And you're absolutely right. It is not a document which is a theoretical document. We are wanting this document to be used. And one of the things we are trying to do is from this, develop what we're calling an assessment parameter, a set of assessment parameters, assessment framework that we can go to cities and say, okay, do you have this? Do you have this? Can we measure the amount of thing? And I think within that, Sunita, a very good point is to measure, is there money behind it? Because it's very easy to talk is cheap, and we know that, when it's an election time, politicians will say something, but do they put their money? So I think the next step really is to take this framework and translate it into something which is a set of tools through which we can hold cities and governments accountable. And that is the path that we are upon right now. And, post this webinar also, any of you who are there, please do get back to us if you feel there's some way you can collaborate with us in this endeavor, because it is not a theoretical document that we're putting out there. It is a framework which must lead to action, which must lead to change in the cities. And I think that you brought up that point, Namita, in terms of what is the change that's going to happen? How do you take this forward? How do you incorporate other elements? Darshini, your first question was, how are you going to use this? What next? And Sunita, you're asking about the financing. So for us, very clearly, this is the first step that we've taken. And in the next year, we want to now find ways of holding cities accountable. And we would really appreciate any feedback from all of you on that. Are there any other questions? I think there's something more in the Q&A. There was a young man, Mr. Hem Singh, who asked, is this just a women's space? And I did inform him that no, we're very happy to have people of all genders, men and our one male. We were trying not to make it, what do you call it, when there are only women on the panel? But Jagan dropped out. What is it called? Any other questions? Any comments? Any of the panelists would like to say anything more?
There's a question by Manjima B. Kalpana. Can you see it? The shift in the conceptual framework from fear to care is very powerful. I wonder, though, about the role of culture, which seems at the heart of caring cities.
Manjima, would you like to speak? We'd be happy to have you articulate your question so we could think about it deeper.
Hi, Kalpana, can you hear me? I wasn't sure how to unmute myself.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, no, I was actually thinking, Safetipin, you've done work in so many cities, and I'm sure, any framework doesn't pan out the same way in different cities, because different cities have their own local cultures also. And when one reads about Japan and how, little children can go about, there's a certain kind of trust that's there in the city, caring, cleanliness, all of that is sort of, taught in schools. And even in a place like Calcutta, one sees a different kind of local culture that informs how people relate to one another in a city. So how can that element, or, the sort of invisible infrastructure, how can you include that in the way that this kind of a framework is rolled out in different places?
No, thanks, Manjima. I think that's a very interesting question for us to reflect upon. And I have no direct answer, but I just want to share one very, I think, innovative example globally, which is in the city of Bogota. The city of Bogota was one of the most violent cities 20 years ago, and it was violent and it was unsafe for literally everybody, not just women. And, there was a the gang violence that was taking place, there was the drug cartels, and the city in the past 20 years, 25 years has transformed itself in so many ways through a series of mayors who actually took very important steps. And I think Darshini and other planners here, this is another element we have to look at, because at the level of governance that is closest to the citizen has the least power in most of our cities. How do we've been talking about empowering the municipal corporations so that, because that is where people have direct contact with their councillors, So what they've done, and the latest thing that Bogota has done, which is I think the most interesting for us, and we'll share some information about it, they have started a program called Blocks of Care. They're actually looking at how to design city around the work of care, which includes things that at every neighborhood, there must be care blocks. And they are saying things like when a woman, or maybe even over time a man or anyone else comes and leaves a child for care, within 15 minutes of walk, they should be able to access some opportunity for themselves during that period when they leave the child. I mean, that level, micro level, they're looking at how do you address, how do you center the work of care in a city? So, it's also not just the economy of care, but the ethics of care where you start center staging it. I do think we need to look at examples where it's worked better. And so if there's certain things that have worked in an East Asian context like Japan, I think how do we learn from that? How do we learn from, say, Latin America, from other African nations? I mean, for example, I know in many cities in Africa, they have traditionally neighborhood watchers. And what they've done to modernize it is to add the gender dimension. So train them on how do you also make sure that even domestic violence, Namita, is addressed by the Neighborhood Watch Patrol. So I think it is an important point that actually a lot of these solutions will be very culturally, socially rooted in spaces. But I think what we're trying to say is there are some broad strokes that we all need to look at. And, as we take this further, I think even we want to try and at least even test it out in 10 cities in the next 6 to 8 months to try and come up with some kind of analysis as a framework. Does it actually tell you something about a city if you're able to come up with a set of assessment parameters? So thank you for that question. If there's nothing else, I know it's 5:35, so we really should wind up. I do want to thank Namita and Darshini. We will be coming back to you for more inputs, actually, because we want to take this forward. As I said, this is a process for us. Thanks to Surabhi for all her work in putting the document together, to Ankita and Riti for the work and the presentation, and to all of you for listening to us. Even if you haven't spoken now, please do reach out to any of us. We are looking for collaborations, partnerships, reflections, feedback to make this a living document. If you can take this and do something useful with it, please do. We don't copyright anything that we do in Safetipin. It's all about, knowledge is only valuable when it's really shared and it's these things. So I do want to end by saying that we do want to take this forward, and we do see that feminist city is possible. And like Darshini and Namita said, I am also at the stage of my life that I want to see some change in my lifetime. I'm not willing to wait for another generation. So let's really work towards it. There are a lot of young people who are also working on this now. I think if we put together some of our heads and really find some new tools to dismantle the master plan, we might actually be able to bring about transformative change. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day, weekend, holiday season. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.